Is Dall-E ethical? The real-world impact of machine learning. And yeah, my name is Aerin Booth, so a little bit more about me other than my career history. Cloud sustainability advocate, what does that mean? I made it up, doesn't really mean much. But it's something where I was like, okay, nobody's talking about this, so I want to start talking a little bit more about carbon emissions in cloud, and I gave myself the job title. I set up a podcast back in April called Public Cloud for Public Good, so I consider myself a podcaster now, like everyone else, content creator. It's like, I guess sometimes like, what white guy doesn't have a podcast these days? And a founder and startup advisor, so I am actually the founder of my own cloud consultancy called Cloud Sustainably. And a startup advisor as well to a startup at the moment called Green Pixie, and a few others as well. So what I kind of wanted to go through to kind of maybe, why should you trust me, and give you a bit more of my background and how I ended up here on this stage today. This is a bit of a graph of my sadness and my happiness. So back in sort of February 2021, I was in a pretty bad place. I was really burnt out. Like I said, I was the head of cloud at the UK Home Office. It was quite a lot of work. It was a big responsibility, but I really couldn't see through the weeds of, what was I actually doing and why was I kind of doing this? And I was kind of very stressed, lots of responsibilities. I listened to a podcast later that summer, which was called Burnout is Not a Sign of Weakness. And it really made me realize that all of these things that I was feeling and what I was working towards, it wasn't a problem with me. It was a problem with the environments that I was working in. And it was a problem with the things I was working on. So, just kind of changing that framework in my head as this, okay, why am I feeling this way? So several months later, I quit my job. I handed my notice in with nothing lined up and basically said goodbye, and was going to figure out what to do next. So I ended up doing some consultancy and contracting for a little while, focused on product management, while I was trying to set up this business. Later that year in December, I was at AWS reInvent, which is a really big cloud conference in the city of Sin in Las Vegas. Which is a bit ironic when you care about sustainability and you fly halfway around the world to talk about cloud computing. But someone at that conference turned around to me and said, what do you really want to do with your life? And I'd not really thought about it in that context before. I was like, well, I'm set up a business, I'm doing these things. This is what's like ahead of me. But after loads of doom scrolling and going from a phone and spending loads of time on Twitter, I guess it made me realize that climate change is probably the biggest problem that we need to care about these days. And I thought to myself, yes, I'm going to start doing something about climate change. So several months later, like I said, I launched the podcast, Public Cloud for Public Good, talking about cloud sustainability and how we can be more efficient in the use of cloud services. And then several months later, here I am, after doing that podcast and meeting Genesis Cloud and being asked to sort of talk here today. And while I've been talking about that journey and my individual happiness and going from burnout, I guess the big thing I really want to highlight is this year we've probably all recognized in the news that lots of other things have happened as well. So, over the summer, we had some of the worst floods we'd ever seen in Pakistan, where 33 million people were displaced. And we've had floods all over the world as well, in Africa and the global south, where hundreds and thousands of people have died. We've also had some crazy heat waves in the UK. We've had several days where we hit nearly 40 degrees, which has never been done before. In Seattle, we've had some of the longest heat waves. In China, we've had some of the longest heat waves as well. And this has really cemented, why I'm doing this, and the reason why I'm doing this is because of this happening all around us. So my mission is, I'm on a mission to get more people talking about cloud sustainability and the real-world impact of technology. So if you're to think about cloud and the whole world and the internet, it's about 4% of our global carbon emissions go towards servicing the internet, all of the wonderful cloud services and SaaS services that we enjoy and use, and TikTok and Twitter and everything else, 4%. And that's probably not maybe a big number. Maybe you are surprised, but when you see that, it's like, okay, well, not really that big. But if you think about the context of airline emissions, we all know we should reduce our flights. There's been loads of campaigns talking about that. We've campaigned against extra runways at Heathrow here in London. Global aviation industry only accounts for 2% of our carbon emissions today. So cloud, right now, today, is already double the aviation industry. That's expected to double by 2030. So by 2030, the internet and cloud and all these services will be at least 8% of our global carbon emissions. And that's the sort of thing where, until I started digging into sustainability and thinking about this, I don't think I'd really realized that direct impact of me working with the Home Office and other companies to say, let's use more cloud services, let's offer more things for people to use and consume. It is having a real world impact. So here's another way of looking at this as well, because technology, at the end of the day, isn't neutral. We've all seen kind of Bitcoin and Web3 come out over the last decade. So here's some figures about the terawatt energy consumption of different technologies. You'll see in the middle there, Bitcoin is about 200 terawatts. Ethereum was 112 terawatts. Great thing about Ethereum, and they've done some really great work. If you've not seen it, they've done the merge recently, where they've gone from a proof of work coin, or whatever you want to call it, to a proof of stake. So their new carbon emissions is right down there at 0.01 in comparison to what it was beforehand, a massive reduction. But terawatts are probably kind of, what does that really mean? For the 1 year to live in London, the whole of London consumes 9 terawatts a year. So if you think about this graph, for us to run Bitcoin, we could have had 22 Londons. That's 22 times 9 million people living at the standard that we live in London around the world, or we had Bitcoin. And I think that's fascinating in the sense of like technology and kind of where we're going and how it links into cloud computing as well. Ethereum, for example, this is a graph from Ethereum's website themselves, where majority of the kind of, the nodes and the connections are on the cloud. So Amazon is 60% of all Ethereum. So up until Ethereum completed that merge, Amazon were effectively responsible for 60% of Ethereum's carbon emissions. Cloud computing effectively enables us to spin up loads of services because it lowers that barrier to entry. We don't have to really consider about the water consumption, all of these different things that go into building a data center because someone else is doing that for us. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that cloud computing is effectively a driver of technology. Machine learning is part of that as well, which is what I'm going to do next, but Bitcoin was enabled and pushed by cloud. So my talk, bringing it back to the topic, is Dall-E. What is Dall-E? If you're not familiar with it, it's a stable diffusion service. It's a SaaS service. You can generate AI images from text. And basically, you can just go on a web browser, type in your prompt, and get some crazy images. So I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, what will that impact be? And in some ways, I don't think we can really tell. For a lot of reasons, and I'll highlight a few, is number one, there's not much of an ethical consensus of whether using something like AI models for producing art is even ethical in itself. So, all of these images that's been training these models are publicly accessible, but that doesn't mean the license or the contribution to how you use that art has been followed, or the people whose art has been consumed by the service have been compensated either. So in some ways, the technology is moving a lot faster than the ethics and the way we think about it. I mean, Dall-E only came about, 12 to 18 months ago, a lot of these services. There's a lot of people in this room who've probably used it and not really thought about it and just, threw it into a web browser and just went, whatever, let's just go for it. And the other problem, like I said, with SaaS services and cloud services, one, there's a low barrier to entry. Open up a web browser, type in your prompt. And two, we only view consumption through pricing and the number of invocations. We're looking at things from an API point of view. We're looking at how much is this going to cost me. And I think that's probably a product of maybe the last decade in tech, is that we're just so used to consume. We just look at cloud and it scales and we can use whatever we want. And we've never really had to stop and think about some of the other issues. And then finally, there's no real world, there's not going to be any visibility of that real world impact for a while. There's not a lot of information available on Dall-E's website. I believe another company called Stable Diffusion, the actual company itself, they released something. They're looking for a funding round. So they're trying to raise $500 billion. They're raising a lot of money. That's wrong, that figure, obviously. But they're trying to raise a lot of money. And one of the reasons why they're trying to do that is they've recently publicized that their AWS bill is £50 million a year, $50 million a year. And that's something that has only come about in the last year. They've ramped it up to £50 million. All that money is going to Amazon. They're obviously making some money on it. But again, that's the only real impact. The only thing that I can see right now is how much they're spending on the cloud. I can't see the carbon emissions, and that's not something that they publicize. So if you think about all of these things, like the push of tech, and we keep on consuming machine learning, and we spin up loads of services on Dall-E and everything else that we're doing, what will the future look like? Well, because I'm slightly a hypocrite and I'm talking about ethics of Dall-E, I used it myself to help with this talk. So I asked Dall-E, what will the world look like in 2100? I'm not saying this is what the world will look like, but this is what Dall-E thinks, and you get the gist. Loads of big cities, a little bit of greenery. I don't think we cut the world in half, but you can see some rockets and colonizing something around us, maybe like making the moon into a disco ball. But it's an idea of what the future looks like from Dall-E. I put in my own prompt, and I was a little bit more specific this time, but if we continue the way that we're going, and cloud computing and data centers consume more and more oil, and basically, contribute to climate change, are we going to be looking at a world that is basically changed to beyond recognition, and all that's left are these data centers running our workloads? I'm just trying to ask that question. Like, put yourselves in the shoes of scientists who discovered how to turn oil into single-use plastic. As data scientists and engineers, you're now at the forefront of how we turn electricity into products and services that could have a worse impact on the world than single-use plastic. We all know the reality that like 50 to 90% of our data is probably never accessed again. A lot of these things are being run with very little purpose other than making money or infinite growth. Machine learning is almost that step change of, if computing was oil, machine learning is all of this consumable data and kind of single-use things that we may never touch again. But that's not to say that technology is inherently bad. This is an example which I came across while I was researching for this talk, is Disney were able to use Stable Diffusion to effectively reduce their carbon emissions by doing denoising on their animation. So I think this was a couple of years ago, so you could see some frames there, but the new denoiser reduced the render times at Disney and Pixar by a factor of 2 to 4 compared to their previous denoisers. And if you think about like companies and houses at Disney who were running millions of hours of processing a day to render all of these animations, that was a massive impact. So they saved somewhere between 50 to 75% of their actual cloud usage just by implementing a new machine learning denoiser. And that's really good, and I think that's sort of positive. Like, how can we use this technology to make something we already do more efficient rather than building something without purpose? If we're all going to use Dall-E to tweet pictures of our cats all of the time, is that really going to make the world a better place? Probably a debate to say whether Disney makes the world a better place, but I can't really say whether Disney's ethical. And that's one of the big things, I guess, that we all face is the company that we work for ethical? Is what I do and what I contribute a good thing? And at a certain scale, there's never going to be a real answer. You kind of just have to consider things in isolation and focus a lot more on yourself and what you feel is about being ethical. So, if you're looking at this kind of talk and some of the things that I'm saying, you're like, wow, this sounds like a problem. Maybe I should do stuff. What are your options? So, one, you can escape. You can quit your job, run away to the country, set up a farm, do something different. You'll probably end up being a little bit more ethical, or at least you won't have a big impact on the world. You can, 2, defend, stay where you are, continue with the status quo, keep things without changing them, and basically continue the way we continue with cloud services and that growth. Or we can start to attack this together. We can face climate change as individuals and say, do you know what? I want to make an impact. I want to do something differently. And we can start thinking about this. So if you do want to attack this with me and with others, then I think we all need to start thinking a little bit bigger. This is something I came across online, which is it's a bit of a mouthful, but the digital tech industry donut flower. And what this represents is the 9 ecological limits around the outside of our planet. So we can't consume all of those things or destroy all those things. And then the 12 societal needs that we need to contribute or produce to basically support society. A lot of the times when we think about what we do and what we build, we never really consider all of these things on top of maybe just money and how much things that we can make profit. Housing is a really interesting one, and it's really relevant to the talk today in London. Earlier this year, councils in West London announced that they'd have to stop house building in 3 different regions until 2030 because the energy grid in West London has got up to capacity due to the number of data centers that are located off the M4. So because these data centers, Amazon, Azure, Microsoft, everything, are off the M4, consuming all of this electricity off the grid, we've effectively said we're going to reduce house building in London by 10% until 2030. If you think about the problems that we face and the issues we see on the streets, is it right that we're prioritizing TikTok and other online services over providing housing, or in other parts of the world, providing clean water? And this is the sort of thing where, at the end of the day, I was working at the Home Office. I was the head of cloud. I looked after the strategy and responsibility for how we use cloud. I wasn't sat there day to day working on visa processing or kind of, passports or whatever else. I could, in some way say, it's not really my problem. I just work in IT. How long can we carry on saying, I just work in IT? And yeah, I think that's the sort of thing with this flower is it allows you to sort of step back and think bigger. So if there are 3 things to do is think about more than profit, think about the purpose and real world impact. If you're doing something like, I produced an image on Dall-E to deliver this talk. It had a purpose. I was trying to get you to think about things differently. In a few weeks' time, I'll be, unfortunately, flying to Vegas to talk about cloud sustainability, which, again, very ironic, but it's got a purpose. So if you are going to do something, make sure it has a purpose, think more than profit, and start to consider the real-world impacts. Number 2, focus on sustainability and build services efficiently. One of the things I found over the last kind of few weeks, years, or whatever it might be, about sustainability is that when you actually start thinking about what that really means, it has so many other benefits elsewhere. If you reduce the data that you hold, then that might improve your security posture, because when you have an impact or a breach, there's less data that's compromised. If you're going to focus on being more efficient because you want to reduce carbon, you'll probably be more efficient and reduce your AWS bill or your cloud bill as well. So you're going to save money, be more secure, and help save the world. Finally, vote. Not just for politicians. There's not any options really to kind of choose from these days who are really green, but with the cloud providers and the SaaS services that you use yourself. So vote with your money. Choose people that are more sustainable, whether that's Google Cloud because they provide a lot more information, whether that's Azure because they're promising to reduce their overall carbon emissions into negative territory by 2050. And finally, not only can you vote with the money, but as individuals, especially those who might have access to the AWS console, if you want to see better features, you want to see more information, you want to see more data relating to this, ask your cloud providers. Go into that support desk and say, hey, this cloud carbon footprint tool is really crap, and it doesn't give me what I need to do my job. I want this feature. And you can do that elsewhere as well. It doesn't have to be focused on like the AWS Cloud Carbon Footprint tool or the Customer Carbon Footprint tool, but you can ask for more services. And we've all kind of heard that these cloud providers are focused on customer needs. They really are. At Amazon themselves, the way they prioritize some of their backlogs, they have a massive spreadsheet that brings together, well, probably not a spreadsheet, probably a database, but they bring together all of these different requests and prioritize the workloads on their teams by the actual requests from their customers. So, if you're thinking, what can I do? Maybe it's not changed with something that you do now, but you can definitely tell your cloud provider to do things better. So one of the things I mentioned there as well is use more efficient cloud services. So I'm here today with Genesis Cloud. Genesis Cloud are a cloud provider. They are looking to make accelerated cloud computing more efficient, accessible, and sustainable. And the main way that they're doing that is by focusing on efficiency and cost. And the best thing about Genesis Cloud is that their data centers in Iceland and Norway are 100% powered by renewable energy. That's geothermal and hydropower at source for those data centers. If you think about data centers in London or elsewhere in the world, they're still producing carbon that's going into the atmosphere. Even if that's offset, even if there's power purchase agreements elsewhere, when we consume that energy in that location, there is carbon being produced. With Genesis Cloud, there is zero carbon being released from the energy consumption. And the other thing which is kind of related is that it means that it is actually cheaper to use their services to access GPU resources because of that as well. They're not paying the same amount of money as they would for other energy in Europe at the moment, and they are able to offer their services for cheaper. So I talked about Stable Diffusion and Dall-E. They've got a really great blog post. If you have actually played around with Dall-E already and maybe you want to be a bit more ethical in the future, you can go on their blog to look at how you can run it yourself on one of their GPUs, and that's a really great blog post. I did try and do it myself, but never managed to get all the way there. And I think for my next talk, I want to sort of compare them all side by side of bad Dall-E images versus ethical Genesis Cloud images. So I'll leave you with kind of a final quote. Sustainability isn't a political choice, not a technical one. It's not a question of whether we can be sustainable, but whether we choose to be. So I guess my question for everyone in the room, now you've listened to my talk, are you ready to act and do something differently? So if you do want to hear more, I have information from my podcast, links to that blog post, or information from Genesis Cloud, then feel free to sort of scan that, and we'll be able to send this information out afterwards and hopefully kind of get you involved and get other people caring about this. So thank you so much.